My name is Lily, and I am a 28-year-old woman preparing to marry my fiancé Richard, who is 30, in just 3 months. To fully grasp my current situation, I need to take you back to my childhood. My parents, Claire, 53, and Tom, 55, met in college and married young. They welcomed me into the world when they were both 25. For the first 10 years of my life, we appeared to be the ideal family. I can vividly recall weekends spent at my grandparents' lake house, where my dad taught me how to fish while my mom prepared lunches. Every Friday, we would gather for family game night, and my parents would take turns reading me bedtime stories. While it wasn't perfect, and they had their share of arguments like any couple, I always felt loved and secure. However, everything changed when I turned 10. My dad began working late more frequently, and my mom seemed increasingly tense and sad. I remember overhearing arguments about someone named Tanya, but I had no idea what was going on. Then, one day, I returned home from school to find my mom crying in the kitchen. She sat me down and told me that Dad had an affair with his coworker, Tanya, who is now 48, and that they were getting a divorce. The following months were a whirlwind of tears, conflict, and bewilderment. Dad moved out, and I remember feeling furious with him for hurting my mom and shattering our family. The divorce was messy and traumatic, marked by intense debates over custody and property division. I recall sitting outside the courtroom during one of their sessions, feeling disoriented and terrified. In the end, my mom received primary custody, and Dad was granted visits every other weekend. At first, I was hesitant to spend time with Dad. I was angry and sad, and I did not want to leave my mom alone. Despite her own anguish, Mom pushed me to give Dad another chance. She would say, "Your father made a mistake, but he still loves you. It's okay to love him too." Gradually, I began to enjoy spending weekends with Dad. He would take me to the movies, show me how to cook, albeit poorly, and we would have lengthy discussions about school and my friends. But things became more complicated when Dad announced 2 years after the divorce that he was marrying Tanya. I met Tanya for the first time at a dinner Dad had arranged. She seemed pleasant enough, bringing me a gifted diary with my name embossed on it and inquiring about my interests. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was the reason my family had fallen apart. Tanya worked hard to establish a bond with me after she and Dad got married. She constantly bought me gifts, clothes, books, art supplies, and suggested mother-daughter activities like spa days or cooking classes. However, her efforts felt forced, and I was never comfortable around her. Part of my discomfort stemmed from my loyalty to my mother, and part of it was the feeling that Tanya was trying to replace her. As I approached adolescence, my connection with Dad and Tanya began to deteriorate. They frequently made disparaging remarks about my mom, saying things like, "It's a shame your mother is so bitter," or "If only your mother could move on like we have." These statements bothered me because I understood how hard my mom was working to co-parent harmoniously. On the other hand, my mom never spoke negatively about Dad or Tanya in front of me. She listened to my complaints but always encouraged me to give them another chance, saying, "They're not perfect, but they try. It's okay to have different relationships with different people in your life." When Tanya became pregnant at 16, Dad was overjoyed, often mentioning how happy he was to have a real family now. Those words struck deep because they made me feel like I wasn't enough for him, like I was merely a remnant of his past rather than an important part of his new life. Tanya suffered a miscarriage at 20 weeks, which was a tough time for them, and I recall feeling a mixture of anguish for their loss and guilty relief that I would not be replaced by a new baby. Dad told me that Tanya would need extra love and support from me, which added a significant amount of pressure to my already complicated teenage life. After the miscarriage, Tanya's attachment to me grew stronger. She began introducing me to everyone as her daughter, which made me uncomfortable. She also urged me to call her mom, something I flatly refused to do. This led to numerous arguments, with Dad always siding with Tanya and accusing me of being insensitive to her feelings. Despite the turmoil, my relationship with my mother remained solid. She was my rock, always willing to listen without judgment and provide support without pressuring me to adopt her worldview. She encouraged me to pursue my interests, which led me to join the school newspaper and later study journalism in college. It was during college that I met Richard. We both wrote for the campus paper and bonded over our shared interest in investigative reporting. Richard's family dynamic was much easier than mine. His parents were still happily married, and he had 2 younger siblings. Initially, I was cautious about letting him into my complicated family relationships, but his understanding and patience allowed me to open up. As I began to plan my wedding, all these previous concerns came to a head. I decided to ask my mother to walk me down the aisle. She had been my steadfast supporter, role model, and greatest friend. When I told Dad and Tanya about my decision, Tanya fell into tears, and Dad became enraged. They accused me of being selfish and insisted that Tanya should also walk me down the aisle because she had been in my life for so long. I stood my ground, stating that my mother is my true mother and the person I wanted by my side on my wedding day. This sparked a heated dispute, with Dad threatening not to attend the wedding if Tanya wasn't given a special position. He mentioned all the times Tanya tried to be there for me, the presents she bought, the activities she planned, but to me, such gestures pale in comparison to my mother's unwavering love and support. Tanya blamed me for never giving her a chance, claiming that after all these years, she considered me her own daughter. She even brought up her miscarriage again, expressing how difficult it had been for her to lose a baby and then have her stepdaughter reject her. While I understood that the miscarriage was a painful experience for her, I didn't think it was appropriate for her to use it as emotional leverage against me. I was sticking to my decision, but I started to wonder if I was being too harsh. Richard fully supported me, saying that it was our wedding and we should do whatever felt right to us. However, some of my extended family members believed I should compromise to maintain the peace. Part of me felt bad for hurting Tanya's feelings, but a larger part was upset that Dad and Tanya were trying to make my wedding about them. After years of attempting to navigate this blended family arrangement, often at the cost of my own emotions, I wanted my wedding day to be a celebration of love, not a battleground for old family feuds. As the wedding approached, I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my heart. I spent countless sleepless nights tossing and turning, replaying every moment of my childhood that led to this pivotal point. I recalled how often I had tried to balance my love for both parents while navigating the turbulent waters of their divorce and my relationship with Tanya. The emotional weight of it all felt suffocating, especially knowing that I was about to embark on a new chapter of my life while leaving behind unresolved issues from the past. One day, a month after my last confrontation with Dad and Tanya, I received an unexpected call from Tanya. I was hesitant to answer, bracing myself for yet another emotional confrontation, but her tears were palpable even through the phone. She apologized for pressuring me throughout the years and stated that she only wanted to be close to me. There was a vulnerability in her voice that I hadn't heard before, and for a brief moment, I felt a glimmer of hope that we might be able to move forward. She suggested that we meet for coffee to talk things over, and after some hesitation, I accepted, thinking it could be an opportunity to clear the air before the wedding. We met at a cafe that held special memories for me from college places where I had laughed, cried, and shared dreams with friends and Richard. Initially, the meeting went well. Tanya was surprisingly sympathetic, even going so far as to accept my choice to have my mother walk me down the aisle. She shared anecdotes about her own wedding, discussing her fears and regrets. As I listened, I found myself softening slightly, viewing her as a person with her own troubles and fears rather than just the woman who had ended my parents' marriage. But then the conversation took a turn that I never saw coming. Tanya casually mentioned that she and Dad were considering renewing their vows next year. At first, I thought she was merely sharing their plans, but then she dropped a bombshell. She offered that I walk her down the aisle at their vow renewal ceremony to balance things out. I was taken aback. It felt like she was attempting to create a quid pro quo, as if my wedding and their vow renewal were somehow interchangeable. I explained that a daughter's wedding is not the same as a vow renewal, but Tanya became agitated. She accused me of not giving her a chance, bringing up her miscarriage yet again, and how she had hoped that having a child would bring our family closer together. I attempted to empathize with her, reminding her that I understood her pain, but that my relationship with her could never replace my bond with my mother. Our conversation spiraled into accusations, blame, and guilt. I finally decided enough was enough. Tanya, this isn't about you. I'm happy that you and Dad are renewing your vows, but my wedding is about me and Richard. I want my mother with me because she has always been there for me. Tanya burst into tears, claiming I was ruining her relationship with Dad. I stood up and walked out, my heart heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. It was at that moment that I realized Tanya would never see me as an individual. I was always going to be her stepdaughter, and my existence was a constant reminder of the past she desperately wanted to forget. After our disastrous meeting, things went from bad to worse. Dad called me later that evening, furious about my disrespectful behavior toward Tanya. He declared that if I couldn't respect his marriage, then he couldn't be part of my wedding. The ultimatum stung. I had never wanted to choose between my father and my mother, and now, with my wedding approaching, I was faced with that very choice. I felt torn, a conflict raging inside me. On one hand, I wanted my dad to be there for me on my wedding day, and on the other hand, I couldn't stand the idea of compromising my feelings for the sake of appeasing him and Tanya. I felt a profound sense of loss, realizing that my father would rather support Tanya than stand by me in my moment of joy. As the wedding drew closer, I made a decision that I felt was right for me. I would not allow Tanya to dictate my choices or push me into uncomfortable situations. I would proudly have my mother walk me down the aisle. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Dad remained unresponsive, and I found solace in the supportive voices of Richard's family. They embraced me, providing encouragement and love during a time of conflict. I also felt a new sense of strength within myself as I prepared for my big day. I was ready to marry Richard, surrounded by people who truly supported me. The wedding day arrived, and I stood in front of the mirror, my mother by my side. As she fastened my veil and helped me adjust my dress, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. We shared stories, laughs, and happy tears, reflecting on our journey together. At that moment, I knew that I had made the right choice. When it was time to walk down the aisle, my heart raced. As I stepped into the sunlight, I glanced at Richard, who wore a wide smile, and I felt a wave of love wash over me. I knew I was entering a new chapter filled with hope and happiness. After my wedding, I received mixed reactions from family and friends about my decision to not include Tanya in my special day. Many applauded me for standing firm, while others questioned if I could have made a compromise. The aftermath weighed heavily on me. I found myself reflecting on the entire situation, wondering if there had been another way to navigate the complexities of my blended family. But as time went on, I became more at peace with my choices. I realized that some relationships are not meant to flourish, and it was crucial to prioritize my well-being and emotional health. I still loved my father, but it became increasingly clear that our relationship would never return to the way it once was. Tanya's resentment toward me only deepened after the wedding, and I found it liberating to let go of that burden. A few months later, I received a text from Dad inviting me to a family gathering to celebrate Tanya's birthday. It was an olive branch, a chance for us to reconnect. I was tempted to attend, but I couldn't ignore the hurt that lingered from our previous encounters. I responded honestly, explaining that while I appreciated the invitation, I needed time and space to heal. As I continued to navigate my relationships with both parents, I found strength in understanding that it was okay to set boundaries. Life is not a perfect script, and sometimes difficult decisions must be made. Though I faced backlash for my choices, I also discovered a new sense of empowerment in valuing myself and my needs above all. Moving forward, reflecting on everything, I learned valuable lessons about love, forgiveness, and family dynamics. While my relationship with my dad may never be what I envisioned, I am grateful for the growth I experienced through this challenging time. I now realize that love can take many forms, and while we cannot always control how others respond, we can control how we choose to respond to them. As Richard and I build our life together, I find peace in knowing that I am surrounded by love and support. We often talk about the importance of establishing healthy boundaries, and I'm proud to say that I have come a long way. I have learned to prioritize my well-being and surround myself with people who genuinely care about my happiness. As we look to the future, I can only hope for a reconciliation with my dad, though I understand it may take time. I have accepted that some relationships may remain strained, and that's okay. What matters most is the love and support I receive from those who stand by me. In the end, I believe that love is a journey, filled with twists and turns, and each choice we make shapes our path. By choosing to embrace my truth, I feel empowered to move forward with confidence, knowing that I deserve to be surrounded by love that is genuine and unwavering. As I prepare for new adventures with Richard, I am reminded that love is not just about family ties, it's about the connections we forge and the strength we find within ourselves. If you find yourself in a complicated family dynamic, remember to honor your feelings, set boundaries, and prioritize your happiness. Your journey is yours alone, and you have the right to navigate it in a way that feels true to you. I couldn't stop thinking about how this cafe, which had once been a place of happy memories, was now linked to a terrible fight. Later that evening, my father called me, furious. He said I had been rude to Tanya and that I owed her an apology. He accused me of being selfish and ungrateful, saying that Tanya always wanted to love me. When I tried to explain my side, he interrupted and said that if I couldn't accept Tanya as my mother, maybe I shouldn't consider him my father anymore. His words hurt deeply. Even though we had disagreed many times before, I never doubted my father loved me. But at that moment, it felt like he was choosing Tanya over me, just like when he left our family for her years ago. I was hurt and angry, but I was also more certain about my decision. Richard has been so supportive during this time, comforting me when I cried, and reminding me that I have every right to set boundaries. We are moving forward with our wedding plans, wanting to create a day that celebrates our love and the family we're building together. My mother has been amazing too. When I told her what happened, she listened without judging me and offered comfort without trying to sway my decision. She reminded me that family can be complicated and that it's okay to prioritize my own emotional well-being. After thinking it over for a few days, I decided to send a goodbye message to my father and Tanya. In it, I want to express my feelings and set clear boundaries. I'll let them know that while I'm open to having a relationship with them, it must respect my feelings and my bond with my mother. I'll also say that if they can't accept this, they won't be invited to the wedding. As I write this message, I feel a mix of sadness and relief. It's not the relationship I wanted with my father and stepmother, but it's the healthiest option for me right now. Am I doing the right thing? Or am I being too harsh and excluding them from this important day in my life? Another month has gone by, and things have gotten more confusing. After I sent my message to my father and Tanya, I didn't hear from them for weeks. Their silence was both a relief and a source of anxiety. I tried to focus on wedding planning, finalizing the menu, fitting clothes with my mother, and working on our vows with Richard. But the unresolved situation with my father and Tanya was always on my mind. Then, last Saturday, my father came to my apartment without warning. I was busy addressing invitations with Richard when the doorbell rang. I was surprised to see my father looking tired and upset. I invited him in more out of shock than anything else. Richard, sensing the tension, left us alone, but gave my hand a gentle squeeze as he left. Once we were alone, my dad broke down. He told me that Tanya had left him. After our fight at the cafe and my message, Tanya had a breakdown. She told my father she couldn't handle the rejection anymore and needed to find herself. So she left to stay with her sister in another state. As I listened to my father's pain, I felt mixed emotions. Part of me felt justified because I had warned Tanya for years that our relationship was unhealthy. But another part of me felt guilty. Had my refusal to accept her as a mother figure really caused her so much pain? My dad was a mess, alternating between apologizing to me and blaming me for Tanya's leaving. He asked if I would consider family therapy with him and Tanya. The idea made me uncomfortable. I told him I wasn't ready for that, especially since Tanya had left him, and I didn't know where we all stood. Then my father dropped another bombshell. He admitted that years ago, when Tanya had a miscarriage, they had been trying to have a baby because Tanya thought it would help me accept her as a mother figure. He admitted they were wrong to try to replace me or force a mother-daughter bond. This revelation shocked me. It explained a lot about their behavior, like the pressure to bond with Tanya and the guilt I felt after the miscarriage. But it also made me angry. I felt manipulated, as if my feelings didn't matter to them in their attempt to create their perfect family. I told my father I needed time to process everything and asked him to leave. I was overwhelmed. After shutting the door, I called my mom because I needed her calm presence and wise advice. She listened carefully as I shared everything, suggesting that I take time to think about how I want my relationship with my father and Tanya to look in the future. Now, I feel torn. On one hand, I feel justified in maintaining my boundaries with Tanya. Her leaving my father seems to show that her attachment to me was more about her own desires than about caring for me. On the other hand, I feel sorry for my father, who seems genuinely regretful and confused. Richard thinks I should keep my boundaries, but also be open to rebuilding my connection with my father over time. He pointed out that my father's honesty about wanting a baby was a step forward, something we hadn't experienced before. When I told my mother what happened, she surprisingly empathized with my father. She reminded me that when people crave love and acceptance, they can make big mistakes. She also pointed out how young my father was when I was born, and how he might have been trying to recreate a family life he thought he had lost. With the wedding just a month away, I'm unsure about inviting my father. Should I give him a chance to be part of this special day? Should I reach out to Tanya now that I understand her motivations? Should I focus on my happiness while they deal with their problems? As I sit here looking at the stack of invitations I haven't sent, I realize that this decision goes beyond just the wedding. It's about the future relationship I want with my father and whether Tanya will be part of my life. It's about finding a balance between compassion and self-protection and figuring out what forgiveness means in a situation with deep wounds. The wedding was last weekend, and I wanted to share how everything turned out. After a lot of thought and several long talks with Richard and my mother, I decided to keep the invitation for my father open, but made it clear it was just for him and not for Tanya. I sent him a long email explaining my decision. I told him I was willing to work on our relationship, but it would take time and he needed to respect my boundaries. I also expressed my hope that he would come to the wedding to celebrate with me, but I understood if he felt he couldn't come without Tanya. To my surprise, my father accepted these terms. He replied to my email, apologizing for everything and saying he wanted to be there for my wedding. He also told me that he and Tanya were still separated and that he was starting to see how much their relationship had affected me over the years. In the week leading up to the wedding, I was busy with last-minute preparations. My mother was a strong support, helping with everything from flowers to calming my nerves. Richard's family came in from out of town, and seeing how well they got along with my mother made me happy for the loving, drama-free family I was marrying into. On the wedding day, I was a mix of nerves and excitement. My mother helped me into my dress, and we both cried as she told me how proud she was of the woman I had become, and how happy she was that Richard and I found each other. It's a memory I'll cherish forever. The ceremony was beautiful, and walking down the aisle with my mother felt amazing. I spotted my father in the front row, looking sad but smiling. When our eyes met, I saw a lot of emotions. Richard's reaction when he saw me walking down the aisle was everything I had hoped for and more. During the reception, I was busy greeting guests and enjoying the celebration with Richard, but I noticed my father looking lonely and sad. He tried to put on a brave face, but I could tell he was struggling. Surprisingly, he had a friendly chat with my mother at one point. They may never be friends, but it was a relief to see them in the same room without causing tension. After the wedding, once things settled down, my father and I had a long talk. He apologized again and promised to try harder to be a good father. He acknowledged his many mistakes, especially in trying to force a connection between Tanya and me. He also told me that Tanya had decided to stay with her sister indefinitely, and they were discussing a trial separation. I'm cautiously hopeful about repairing my relationship with my father. We've decided to start having monthly dinners together to reconnect without any pressure. It won't be easy, and there will be a lot of pain to deal with, but I'm willing to try. For now, I've decided not to reach out to Tanya. I think we both need time and space to heal and move forward. Maybe one day we can talk about everything that happened, but for now, my focus is on my new life with Richard and rebuilding my relationship with my father. This whole experience has been a roller coaster, but I'm glad I stood my ground. I'm beginning my married life with a better understanding of my family dynamics and clearer boundaries. The wedding turned out to be more than just a celebration of my love for Richard. It also marked a new start in my relationship with my parents. Richard and I are settling into married life, and it feels great to face the future together, knowing we can handle whatever comes our way. We're planning a belated honeymoon to Japan next month, and we're both excited about it. Thank you to everyone who supported me on this journey. Your guidance and encouragement made a difference, and I appreciate all of you.